In the ancient world, silence was not a sign of peace. It was a sign of the predator. We often imagine history as a cacophony of shouting men, clashing bronze, and screaming horses. We imagine the great kings standing atop mountains, delivering speeches that thunder across the valleys. But the true masters of power understood something that the noisy, desperate politicians of Athens did not. They understood that words are a currency. And like any currency, the more you print, the less it is worth. When a man screams threats, he is selling you his fear. He is begging you to believe him. But when a man whispers, or better yet, when he says almost nothing at all, he forces you to fill in the blanks. And the human imagination is always far more terrifying than reality. To understand the weight of a single word, we must first look at the man who provoked it. Philip II of Macedon. Before his son Alexander conquered the world, Philip was the one who built the machine. He was not a man of refined southern sensibilities. He was a creature of the north, forged in the bitter winds of Macedonia, a land of hard, jagged rocks and harder men. Philip looked at the fractured city-states of Greece, not with reverence, but with the cold, predatory gaze of a wolf, looking at a flock of sheep who had forgotten how to fight. He didn't just conquer, he suffocated. His army was a wall of iron bristles, the Sarissa phalanx, pikes 18 feet long that moved like a singular, breathing organism. When Philip marched, the ground didn't just shake. It groaned under the weight of inevitable submission. City after city fell. Thebes, Thessaly, one by one. The lights of Greek democracy were snuffed out, replaced by the heavy, suffocating shadow of the Macedonian king. He was a master of psychological warfare long before the term existed. He knew that the battle wasn't won when the swords touched. It was won when the enemy's mind broke. He would send letters, long, winding, terrifying letters detailing exactly what would happen to your wives, your children, and your temples if you resisted. He painted pictures with words, gruesome tapestries of burning roofs and enslaved nobility. He paralyzed his enemies with the sheer volume of his threats. By the year 346 BC, he was the master of the known world. The map was stained with his influence. Every king, every general, every council bowed their heads when his messengers arrived, except for one. Down in the southern peninsula, isolated by the jagged spine of the mountains, lay Laconia, the home of the Spartans. By this time, Sparta was not the apex predator it had been during the days of Thermopylae. Their population had dwindled. Their walls were non-existent. They famously claimed their men were their walls. To the outside world, they looked like a fading echo of a dead glory, a relic, a ruin waiting to be toppled. Philip looked at them and saw an easy kill, a final loose end to tie up before he turned his eyes toward Persia. But Philip, for all his genius, made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that because Sparta was quiet, they were weak. He assumed that because they did not send frantic diplomats begging for treaties, they were paralyzed by fear. He did not understand the Spartan mind. To a Spartan, speech was not for communication, it was for utility. They were trained from the age of 7 in the agoge, not just to fight, but to endure, to starve without begging, to bleed without crying out, to speak only when the words were heavier than the silence. This was the Laconic way of philosophy of speech, named after their region, Laconia. It was a weaponization of brevity. Philip decided to break them with fear. He drafted a message. It was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was designed to trigger every anxiety a leader could have. The messenger rode south, the dust kicking up around his horse's hooves, carrying the scroll that would end Spartan defiance. He arrived in the unwalled city, surrounded by men who looked at him with eyes like cold flint. There was no pomp, no gold filigree, no shouting crowds. just the eerie stillness of a military camp masquerading as a city. The messenger unrolled the scroll. The words spilled out into the dry air. "If I win this war, you will be slaves forever." The threats continued, a cascade of ifs. "If I bring my army into your land, I will destroy your farms, slay your people, and raze your city." The message was clear. It was a logical equation of doom. Philip was saying, "I have the numbers, I have the momentum, and I have the will." The variable was if. The Spartan ephors, the 5 elders who oversaw the kings, listened to the translation. They did not look at each other, they did not gasp. They did not call for an emergency council of war. They did not send spies to check Philip's position. They simply looked at the messenger as if he were a buzzing fly. The psychology of the room shifted. Philip's message was complex. It required processing. It required the Spartans to imagine the burning farms, the slavery, the death. It demanded they engage with his narrative, but the Spartans refused to step into his frame. They understood that to argue with a tyrant is to acknowledge his power. To explain why you will fight is to admit you are afraid of losing. To send a counter-threat is to participate in the game of fear. They chose to not play. They took a single strip of parchment. They did not write a speech about liberty. They did not invoke the gods. They did not mention their ancestors at Thermopylae. They dipped the quill in the ink and wrote a single Greek word. If, that was it. Acre, if the messenger must have stared at it in confusion. He rode back north, carrying the weight of that single syllable. When Philip received the reply, he unfurled the scroll, expecting a surrender, or perhaps a desperate, blustering declaration of war. Instead, he found a mirror. "If I come to Sparta, if..." The word hung in the air like a blade. It was a psychological void. It stripped Philip's threat of all its inevitability. Philip had said, "When I come, you will die." Sparta said, "You are assuming you can arrive." With 2 letters, they transformed Philip from a god of war into a man making a gamble. They forced him to confront the possibility of failure. They didn't threaten to kill him. They didn't need to. The threat was implicit in the brevity. It implied that the outcome was so uncertain, so dangerous for Philip, that he shouldn't even finish the sentence. It was the ultimate dominance via minimalism. By saying almost nothing, they implied they were saving their breath for the killing stroke. It created a vacuum of information. Was Sparta hiding a secret army? Did they know something Philip didn't? Were they simply so insane that they welcomed death? Philip, the great tactician, the man who analyzed every angle, suddenly had no data to analyze. Just a cold, hard wall of indifference. The result is a matter of historical record. Philip of Macedon, the man who conquered the civilized world, the man who crushed Athens and Thebes, never marched on Sparta. He skirted around them. He devastated the surrounding lands. He politicized against them. But he never sent the Sarissa phalanx into the heart of Laconia. The risk was too high. The psychological price was too steep. The silence had spooked the wolf. This moment teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of authority. In our modern world, we are obsessed with explanation. We overcommunicate. We think that if we just explain our position, if we just add more words, we will be understood and respected. But true power often resides in what is held back. When you over-explain, you are handing the other person the tools to dismantle your argument. You are showing them the edges of your confidence. The Spartans understood that the unknown is always more terrifying than the known. By refusing to elaborate, they became a monster in Philip's mind. They became the thing in the dark. They leveraged the negative space of psychology. Just as a painter uses shadow to define the light, a master negotiator uses silence to define the leverage. Philip died by the assassin's blade years later, leaving his empire to Alexander. And even Alexander, the boy who thought himself a god, treated Sparta with a cautious, wide berth for years. The echo of that single if reverberated through the Macedonian court for a generation. It was a monument to the fact that sometimes the loudest thing you can do is refuse to scream. The Spartans proved that one word could stop an army. But our next subject realized that to truly control the world, he didn't need words at all. He needed a sound. If the Spartans taught the world the power of a single word, the steppes of Mongolia taught us that words were ultimately inefficient. Words require processing. Words require the brain to hear, interpret, decide, and then act. And in the eyes of the greatest conqueror the world has ever seen, that split second of processing, that tiny gap of human thought, was a weakness. It was a crack in the armor where hesitation could take root. To conquer the earth, you did not need soldiers who listened to speeches. You needed soldiers who had forgotten how to think. Move your mind now from the rocky cliffs of Greece to the endless, flat ocean of grass that is the Eurasian steppe. It is a place where the wind never stops screaming. It tears through the Jurtfeld, it freezes the tears on your face before they can fall, and it carries the scent of blood for miles. In the 12th century, this place was a cauldron of chaos. Tribes fought tribes, brothers killed brothers, and loyalty was as shifting as the desert sand. A Khan could command 10,000 men at sunrise and find himself alone with his throat cut by sunset, simply because his generals decided the odds had changed. Into this world of treacherous fluidity stepped Temujin, the man who would become Genghis Khan. He looked at the warfare of his ancestors and saw a fundamental flaw. It was too human. It relied on courage, which flickers. It relied on loyalty, which fades. He wanted to build a machine. He wanted an army that moved not like a collection of men, but like a single, devastating limb of his own body. To do this, he needed to bypass the human brain. He needed to reach into the nervous system of his warriors and rewire the connections between ear and finger. He found his answer in a piece of hollowed bone. The invention was deceptively simple. It was an arrowhead carved from bone or iron, drilled with precise, angled holes. When fired, the air rushing through the holes didn't just hiss, it shrieked. It created a high-pitched, vibrating whistle that sounded like a banshee tearing through the sky. It was a sound that tapped into the primal brain, the part of the mammal that hears a predator in the dark and freezes. But for the Mongols, it wasn't meant to scare the enemy, at least. Not at first. It was meant to program the shooter. The training began in the deep winter, when the breath of the horses hung in the air like fog. Genghis gathered his Kasig, his imperial guard, the elite of the elite. He held up the whistling arrow. The wood was smooth in his gloved hand. He explained the rule. It was a rule of absolute binary simplicity. There was no if, there was only when. When this arrow flies, he told them, his voice low and grinding like stones, you shoot where it hits. You do not look. You do not check the target. You do not ask why. If my whistling arrow strikes a rock, 10,000 of your arrows must strike that rock before the dust settles. If it strikes a tree, that tree must be turned to splinters. It started innocently enough. They rode out onto the frozen plains. Genghis would draw his bow, the recurve bending under immense tension, and loose the whistling shaft. Shui, the sound cut through the wind. The arrow would thud into the ribcage of a wild boar. Instantly, 100 other arrows would slam into the beast, turning it into a pincushion of feathers and wood. The men smiled. This was easy. This was hunting. They felt the power of the volley, the satisfaction of the synchronized kill. They were learning the rhythm. Hear the whistle, loose the string, stimulus, response. Then the Khan tightened the screw. Days later, the company was riding again. The trust had been built. The reflex was setting in like wet concrete. Suddenly, Genghis unslung his bow. He didn't aim at a boar. He didn't aim at a wolf. He swung his torso around and leveled the whistling arrow at his own favorite horse. It was a magnificent beast, a white stallion that he had ridden into a dozen battles, a creature he ostensibly loved. The whistle screamed through the air. The arrow buried itself in the stallion's neck. The horse reared, eyes wide with betrayal. Behind him there was a stutter, a ripple of confusion. The soldiers' hands flew to their quivers. They drew their bows, but then they stopped. They looked at the target. The Khan's horse? Surely not. He made a mistake. He slipped. The human brain kicked in. The logic centers fired. They hesitated. Only a few arrows flew, embedding themselves in the dying animal. The rest of the men sat on their mounts, arrows nocked, looking at their leader in bewildered silence. Genghis turned his horse around slowly. He didn't scream. He didn't lecture them on the chain of command. He simply looked at the men who had not fired. He signaled to his executioners. Every man who had hesitated, every man who had let his brain question the order, was dragged from his saddle and beheaded in the snow. Their warm blood melted the ice, steaming in the cold air. The lesson was carved into the survivors' minds with the violence of a thunderclap. The target does not matter. The morality does not matter. The logic does not matter. The sound is the only God you worship. The conditioning continued. The terror of the hesitation was now greater than the terror of the action. They rode again. The whistle shrieked. It hit a tent. The tent was destroyed. It hit a prisoner. The prisoner was erased. The gap between the sound and the volley was shrinking. It was becoming instantaneous. The human delay was being surgically removed. Then came the final test. The test that would separate the men from the machine. Legends vary on the specific details. Some attribute this dark fable to Modu Chanyu of the Zhongnu, the spiritual ancestor of the Mongol way of war, while others place it squarely at the feet of the Khan's rise. But the psychological mechanism remains the absolute truth of the step. The Khan rode out with his men. By his side was his wife, or perhaps his favorite concubine, a woman of status, beauty, and connection to the leader. The camp watched. The wind howled, whipping the fur of their coats. Genghis drew the bow. The bone whistle caught the light. He aimed it directly at the woman's heart. There was no pause this time. There was no logic. The arrow flew, screaming its terrible, vibrating command. And before the sound had even faded from the air, 100 bowstrings snapped in unison. There was no ripple of confusion. There was no hesitation. The air went black with a cloud of iron. The woman fell, riddled with so many arrows that her body was nearly disintegrated before it hit the ground. Genghis lowered his bow. He looked at the smoking ruin of what he loved, and then he looked at his men. He smiled. He finally had it. He didn't have soldiers anymore. He had a weapon. He had bypassed the soul and wired himself directly into their muscles. This was the birth of the Pavlovian terror that would conquer the known world. We often talk about the Mongol strategy, the feigned retreats, the envelopments, the horse archers. But the engine of that strategy was this absolute, terrifying conditioning. When the Mongols entered battle, they moved with a hive-mind fluidity that the knights of Europe could not comprehend. European knights were individuals, seeking glory, seeking ransom, hesitating to kill a noble opponent. The Mongols were a flood. Imagine standing on a battlefield in Hungary or China. You see the horde on the horizon, and then you hear it. A single high-pitched scream cutting through the noise of battle. You look up, trying to find the source. And then the sky turns dark. not with one arrow, but with 10,000, all converging on the exact point where the whistle sang. There was no escaping it. It was a precision airstrike in the 13th century. The whistling arrow became the voice of death itself. It meant that the Khan was watching, and where his eye fell, reality would cease to exist. It stripped the enemy of their courage, because it stripped the Mongols of their humanity. How do you fight an enemy that does not fear killing its own kin? How do you negotiate with a force that reacts to a sound faster than it reacts to pain? The Mongols conquered not just because they were faster, but because they had removed the friction of conscience. They proved that if you drill a behavior deep enough, past the logic, past the morality, past the love, you can turn a man into a mechanism. You can take the complex, beautiful, messy thing that is the human soul and reduce it to a simple input-output circuit. Whistle, kill, whistle, kill. Genghis Khan used sound to command the battlefield. He filled the open air with shrieks that turned men into automatons. But centuries later, inside the cold walls of the Kremlin, a different kind of leader discovered that the most terrifying sound of all was absolute silence. The screams of the Mongol steppes fade into the past, replaced by a sound far more mechanical and rhythmic. The grinding of gears, the humming of telegraph wires, the heavy, industrial heartbeat of the 20th century. We move now from the open air, where death came on the wind, to a place where the air was recycled, stale, and thick with the smell of cheap tobacco. We enter the Kremlin. Specifically, we enter the private meeting room of the General Secretary. If Genghis Khan was a storm, Joseph Stalin was a glacier. Slow, heavy, crushing everything beneath a weight that felt inevitable. While his contemporary, Adolf Hitler, was manic screaming at crowds, spitting into microphones. Flailing his arms like a conductor of hatred, Stalin was the opposite. He was the grey blur. He was a man who understood that in the modern world, power did not look like a warrior on a horse. It looked like a bureaucrat with a pipe, standing quietly in the corner of the room. The year is 1937. The height of the Great Terror. The setting is a room with high ceilings, draped in heavy velvet curtains that block out the Moscow night. The table is long, covered in green felt, illuminated by low, yellow electric lamps. Around it sit the most powerful men in the Soviet Union. Generals who have commanded armies. Commissars who have signed thousands of death warrants. Men of iron. And yet, if you look closely at their hands resting on the green felt, they are shaking. There is a sheen of sweat on their upper lips that catches the lamplight. They are terrified. They are waiting for Koba. Stalin enters the room. He does not march. He walks softly, his boots making a dull thud on the parquet floor. He does not take the head of the table immediately. He wanders. He packs his pipe with tobacco from broken Herzegovina floor cigarettes, crumbling the paper with slow, deliberate fingers. The scratching sound of the tobacco crumbling is the loudest thing in the room. He lights a match. The flare illuminates his pockmarked face, the yellow eyes that seem to have no depth. He takes a drag, exhaling a cloud of blue-grey smoke that drifts over the heads of his ministers, and then he waits. This was the weaponized pause. Psychologists call it the vacuum. It is a fundamental truth of human social interaction that we despise silence. Silence in a group setting creates tension. It implies judgment. It implies a disconnect. When a silence stretches for 3 seconds, it is awkward. When it stretches for 10, it is unbearable. When it stretches for a minute, in a room where your life depends on the approval of the man pacing behind you, it is torture. Stalin would often pace behind the chairs of his subordinates while they sat frozen. He would walk softly, so they couldn't be quite sure where he was. Was he behind Molotov? Was he standing over Beria? They would stare straight ahead, listening to the soft exhales of smoke, waiting for him to open the meeting, waiting for him to set the agenda, to tell them what the truth was today. Because in the Soviet Union, the truth was fluid. Yesterday, the kulaks were enemies. Today, maybe the engineers are enemies. If you spoke too soon, if you defended the wrong person before you knew Stalin's mood, you were signing your own execution order. But Stalin wouldn't speak. He would let the silence ripen. He would let it grow heavy and toxic. He forced them into a psychological corner. The pressure to fill the void became physically painful. Someone had to speak. Someone had to break the tension. And this was the trap. Because whoever spoke first revealed themselves. Comrade Stalin, a minister, might stammer, his voice cracking. I have been looking into the production numbers in the Ukraine. I believe there are wreckers sabotaging the grain harvest. The minister is guessing. He is throwing a piece of meat into the dark, hoping the beast will eat it and be satisfied. He doesn't know if there are wreckers. He just knows that silence is dangerous and an accusation is safe. He is trying to align himself with a position Stalin hasn't even taken yet. Stalin stops pacing. He stands behind the man's chair. He says nothing. He just puffs on the pipe, puff, puff. The silence returns, but now it is focused. It is a spotlight burning into the back of the minister's neck. Is Stalin silent because he agrees, or is he silent because he knows the minister is lying? The panic sets in. The minister starts to babble. He starts to incriminate others to save himself. It's not just the harvest. It's the railways too. I saw Petrov speaking with foreigners. Stalin listens. He absorbs the information. He collects the betrayal. He is using the silence to harvest their paranoia. By refusing to lead the conversation, he forces his subordinates to externalize their own fears and ambitions. They become his spies, his prosecutors, and his executioners, all because they are terrified of the quiet. He creates a power vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does fear. The men in that room would fill that vacuum with the bodies of their colleagues just to make the tension stop. They would denounce their own brothers, their own wives, just to hear a grunt of approval from the man with the pipe. Sometimes, the silence was even more direct. There are reports of meetings where Stalin would receive a list of names, potential enemies of the people. He would sit at the head of the table, put on his spectacles, and read the list in total silence. The ministers would watch his face, desperate for a micro-expression, a frown, a nod. Stalin would take a red pencil. He would hold it over a name. He would pause, the tip of the pencil hovering like the sword of Damocles. The man whose name was on the page might be sitting right there at the table. Imagine the sound of your own heart hammering against your ribs as you watch a red pencil hover over your name. Stalin would make a mark. Maybe a tick. Maybe a cross. Maybe he would write the letters. VM, Vishchaya Mera, the highest measure of punishment, death. Then he would look up, take off his spectacles, and smile softly. Let us have tea. He wouldn't say who he had marked. He wouldn't say why. He would let the meeting continue. The man who had been marked didn't know if he was a corpse walking or a survivor. He would have to sit through tea, stirring the sugar, smiling, laughing at Stalin's dry jokes, all while the silence of that red pencil mark screamed in his mind. This was psychological dismantling. It reduced powerful, intelligent, hardened revolutionaries to children. It stripped them of their agency. When you are constantly guessing what the leader wants, you cease to have a self. You become a reflection of his will. You become a hollow vessel waiting to be filled by his commands. The most terrifying aspect of Stalin's silence was that it acted as a mirror. When you stare into a dark room, eventually your eyes start to create shapes. You start to see monsters that aren't there. Stalin held up a dark mirror to the Soviet hierarchy. He let them stare into it until they saw treason everywhere. They saw sabotage in a broken tractor. They saw assassination plots in a bad crop yield. They projected their own guilt, their own incompetence, and their own ambition onto the blank canvas he provided. He didn't need to scream, "Kill the traitors." Like a maniac, he simply had to wait for them to find traitors for him. He crowdsourced the terror. By the time the purges ended, the silence of the Kremlin had bled out into the streets. It wasn't just the ministers who were quiet. The whole country had learned the lesson. In the apartments of Moscow, people stopped talking. They whispered, they turned up the radio to cover their conversations. They stopped looking each other in the eye. The weaponized pause had become a national culture. To speak was to risk death. To be silent was to survive. For a little while longer, Stalin proved that you can control a nation of millions without raising your voice. You simply have to make them afraid of what you might say. You have to make them realize that the only thing worse than the tyrant's scream is the tyrant's contemplation. Because in the silence, anything is possible. In the silence, you are alone with your own sins. Stalin used silence to hunt traitors from above. He used it to crush the spirit of the individual under the weight of the state. But history is a pendulum. And at the exact same moment that Stalin was silencing the Soviet Union, miles away in the chaotic streets of 1930s Germany, another man was discovering the other side of the coin. He was discovering that silence could be a weapon of the oppressed. He used silence to defy a monster from below. We have spoken of silence as a weapon of the powerful. We have seen it used by kings to threaten armies, by warlords to command killers, and by dictators to purge their own courts. In those hands, silence is cold. It is a tool of oppression, descending from the throne to the gutter. But silence is not property. It belongs to no one. And sometimes, in the darkest moments of history, it can be picked up by the weak. It can be used not to oppress, but to resist. To understand the weight of this particular silence, you must first understand the noise that surrounded it. Hamburg, Germany, June 13, 1936. The Blom and Voss shipyard. The air smells of wet iron, brackish water, and the sweat of thousands of men. It is a grey day, the sky hanging low and heavy over the industrial heart of the Third Reich. We are at the launch of a new ship, the Horst Wessel, named after the Nazi martyr. The atmosphere is not festive, it is hysterical. The pageantry of the Nazi state is in full swing. Swastika banners, red and black like open wounds, drape down the sides of the massive steel hull. The air vibrates with the sound of brass bands playing martial music, a rhythm designed to make the heart beat in time with the state. But the loudest sound is the crowd. Workers, officials, soldiers, they are packed shoulder to shoulder, a dense, grey mass of humanity. They have been fed a diet of triumph. They have been told that they are the master race, that the humiliation of the Great War is over, that they are forging a new destiny from steel and will. Then the signal is given. Adolf Hitler has arrived, or perhaps his deputy, Rudolf Hess. It doesn't matter which idol is on the podium. The reaction is the same. The command echoes through the shipyard. Sieg, Heil, Hail, Victory. It happens in an instant. It is a reflex, conditioned just like the Mongol archers, but born of ideology rather than discipline. 10,000 right arms shoot into the air. The motion is snapped and precise. It transforms the crowd from a collection of individuals into a single, jagged landscape. It looks like a field of wheat suddenly flattened by a gale force wind. It is a forest of arms, stiff, rigid, pointing toward the leader. The sound is deafening. a roar of loyalty that shakes the rivets in the ship's hull. To the Nazi propagandists filming the event, this is perfection. It is the image of glacial tongue coordination. The individual has ceased to exist. There is only the Volk, the people, one body, one mind, one will. But the camera lens, which is meant to capture perfection, accidentally captures a flaw. If you look closely at the photograph that emerged decades later, grainy, black and white window into the past, you can see it. In the middle of this ocean of raised arms, in the center of the fanaticism, there is a static point. A void in the pattern. There is a man. He is not shouting. He is not stiffening his posture to match the soldiers. He is standing casually, leaning slightly back, with a look on his face that can only be described as a smirk of supreme disgust. And his arms are not raised. They are crossed, tightly, defiantly, across his chest. His name is August Landmesser, and in this moment, he is the loudest man in Germany. Psychologically, what Landmesser is doing here is known as the contrast effect. The human brain is wired to ignore the background and focus on the anomaly. When 10,000 men move in unison, they become the background. They become texture. They lose their humanity and become scenery. By refusing to move, by locking his arms in a knot of resistance, Landmesser separates himself from the scenery. He becomes the only human being in the frame. The danger of this act cannot be overstated. We look at the photo now and we think, what a brave man. We romanticize it. But put yourself in that shipyard. Feel the pressure of the bodies pressing against you. Smell the fear and the adrenaline. Everyone around you is screaming their loyalty. To not join them is not just a difference of opinion. It is an act of treason. It is a physical declaration that you are an enemy of the organism. The man standing next to him is straining his arm upward, desperate to prove he belongs. The man behind him is shouting until his throat is raw. The social pressure is a crushing physical weight, thousands of pounds per square inch, demanding that you lift your arm. Just lift it. Just blend in. It's so easy. Just a simple movement of the muscle and you are safe. You are part of the tribe. Why did August Landmesser stand there like a stone in a rushing river? Was he a communist, a political agitator, a saint? No, his motivation was far more dangerous than politics. It was personal. August Landmesser was in love. Years earlier, he had joined the Nazi Party, hoping it would help him get a job. He was a simple worker. But then he met a woman named Irma Eckler. She was Jewish. In the twisted, race-obsessed logic of the Nuremberg laws, their love was a crime. It was Rassenschande, race defilement. They tried to marry, but the state forbade it. They had children, but the state labeled them bastards. When the order came to salute, when the crowd roared for the regime that had criminalized his heart, Landmesser looked at the swastikas and he didn't see national glory. He saw the machine that was tearing his family apart. He saw the men who said his children were mistakes. He saw the bureaucracy that had turned his love into a felony. So he crossed his arms. It was a gesture of pure, visceral rejection. It wasn't a calculated political protest. It was a husband saying no. It was a father saying, I will not worship the thing that hates me. In that moment, Landmesser exposed the fragility of the totalitarian state. Dictatorships rely on the illusion of unanimity. They need everyone to believe that everyone else believes. It is a house of cards built on the spiral of silence. If I think everyone else is a Nazi, I will act like a Nazi to survive. And because I act like a Nazi, you think I am a Nazi, so you act like one too. We trap each other in a loop of false conformity. Landmesser broke the loop. By standing still, he proved that the consensus was a lie. He proved that the man next to him might also be faking it. He introduced a virus into the system, the possibility of dissent. The tragedy, of course, is that reality is not a movie. The camera clicked, capturing his defiance, and then time moved on. The crowd lowered their arms. The ship launched, and the machine came for August Landmesser. He attempted to flee to Denmark with his family, but was captured at the border. He was charged with dishonoring the race. He was imprisoned. Irma was taken by the Gestapo. She was moved from prison to prison, eventually sent to the Bernburg Euthanasia Center, where she was murdered in the gas chambers. One of the millions erased by the system Landmesser refused to salute. Landmesser himself was released, then drafted into a penal battalion, the 999th Fort Infantry Battalion. These were units composed of criminals and political enemies, thrown into the meat grinder of the Eastern Front to clear minefields with their bodies or absorb enemy fire. He disappeared into the mud and blood of Croatia in 1944. Presumed dead, his body was never found. For decades, the photograph sat in an archive, unnoticed. August Landmesser was just another casualty, another ghost in the wreckage of Europe. But in 1991, one of his daughters saw the picture in a newspaper. She looked at the crowd, the sea of faceless, shouting robots, and then she saw the man with the crossed arms. She recognized the face. She recognized the posture of her father. That image is now one of the most famous photographs of the 20th century. It hangs in museums. It is shared across the digital world. Why? Because it answers a question that haunts us all. We all like to believe that if we were there in 1936, we would be the one standing still. We tell ourselves that we would have the moral clarity to cross our arms, but statistics tell us otherwise. Biology tells us otherwise. The instinct to survive, to blend in, to salute, is overwhelming. Landmesser forces us to confront the terrifying reality of conformity. He shows us that the monster of the Nazi regime wasn't just Hitler. It wasn't just the SS. The monster was the crowd. The monster was the man standing 6 inches away from Landmesser, his arm raised high, his eyes glazed over with belonging. That man is the villain. That man is the default setting of human nature. August Landmesser's silence was not strategic. It did not stop the war. It did not save his wife. It did not save himself. In the grand calculus of the war, his refusal changed absolutely nothing. The ship still launched. The bombs still fell. The camps still burned. But in the landscape of the human soul, it changed everything. It serves as a permanent, static reminder that the individual can exist even when the world demands they dissolve. He proved that you can kill a man. You can bury him in an unmarked grave. You can murder the woman he loves. But you cannot force his arm to lift if his will is locked against it. He used his body to create a visual silence in a screaming world. He stood like a rock in the current, proving that the current was not inevitable. Landmesser used silence to keep his dignity, to preserve a small, private fortress of integrity that the state could not breach. He died for it. But our final subject used silence for a different purpose. He didn't use it to defend his own dignity. He used it to destroy the dignity of the most powerful man on earth. We have traveled from the rocky cliffs of Sparta to the blood-soaked steppes of Mongolia. We have walked the terrified halls of the Kremlin and stood in the grey, industrial docks of Nazi Germany. We have seen silence used to threaten, to kill, to terrorize, and to resist. In every story so far, the silence has been a reaction to fear. The Spartans feared slavery. The Mongols feared the Khan. The Soviets feared the purge. Landmesser feared the loss of his soul. But for our final chapter, we must go back. Back to the heat and dust of ancient Corinth in the 4th century BC. We must look at a silence that was not born of fear, but of absolute, terrifying indifference. we must witness the moment when the man who owned the world met the man who owned nothing. And we must ask ourselves, which one was truly powerful? The year is 336 BC. The air in Corinth is thick with the smell of olive oil, sweating bodies, and roasting meat. The city is in a frenzy. The master of the known world has arrived. Alexander the Great. He is barely 20 years old, but he is already a golden god walking among mortals. His hair is like a lion's mane, bleached by the sun. His armor is polished bronze that shines so bright it hurts the eyes. He rides a horse that eats human flesh, or so the legends say. Alexander is not just a king, he is a force of nature. He is a man who wakes up in the morning and redraws the map of the world before breakfast. He is surrounded by a retinue of generals, philosophers, poets, and sycophants, a moving city of noise and ego. Wherever he goes, he sucks the oxygen out of the room. He demands total attention. He operates on a simple psychological premise. I am the giver, you are the receiver. I am the sun, you are the moon reflecting my light. He moves through the Cranion, the gymnasium district of Corinth. The crowds part like water. Men throw flowers, women faint. The noise is deafening. A cacophony of worship, Alexander soaks it in. He is addicted to this validation. His entire identity is built on the reflection of his glory in the eyes of others. But then, the procession stops. The noise dies down, replaced by a confused murmur. The golden boy has stopped walking. He is looking at something on the ground. It is a large ceramic jar. A pithos, it is cracked, stained with mud, and lying on its side in a patch of dirt. It looks like trash. And lying halfway inside this jar, like a stray dog, is an old man. He is naked, save for a filthy rag. His skin is leathered by the sun, his beard is matted with crumbs, and he smells of the street. He is scratching himself, completely unconcerned with the thousands of people staring at him. He does not stand up, he does not bow, he does not even look at the king. He is busy squinting at the light, enjoying the warmth on his old bones. This is Diogenes the Cynic. To understand what happens next, you have to understand who Diogenes was. He was not just a homeless man, he was a philosophical terrorist. He believed that civilization was a lie. He believed that manners, status, money, and power were all fake constructs designed to enslave the human spirit. He lived in a jar to prove that a man needs nothing to be happy. He urinated in public. He barked at aristocrats. He carried a lantern in broad daylight, shouting that he was looking for an honest man, but could only find scoundrels. He was the ultimate frame breaker. In psychology, a frame is the unwritten set of rules that governs a social interaction. When a king walks up to a beggar, the frame is clear. The king is superior, the beggar is inferior. The king speaks, the beggar listens. The king gives, the beggar thanks. Alexander walks up to the jar. He casts a long, sharp shadow over the old man. The crowd holds its breath. This is the clash of two universes. The man who has everything versus the man who wants nothing. Alexander looks down. He is amused. He feels generous. He wants to show his benevolence to this famous philosopher. He wants to play the role of the good god. I am Alexander the Great King, he announces. His voice booms. It is a statement that usually makes armies drop their weapons. The old man in the jar looks up. He shields his eyes, not from the glory of the king, but from the glare. He grunts, and I am Diogenes the dog. The crowd gasps. To call yourself a dog was an insult. Diogenes wears it like a title. He is saying, I am outside your hierarchy. You cannot insult me, because I have already insulted myself more than you ever could. Alexander smiles. He is determined to win this interaction. He wants to give this man a gift, to prove that he, Alexander, is the source of all good things. He leans in, his golden armor creaking. Diogenes. Alexander says, "I have heard of your wisdom. I admire your spirit. Ask of me anything you wish, and I will grant it." Think about that offer. Ask of me anything. It is a blank check from the richest man on earth. Alexander could give him a palace. He could give him a mountain of gold. He could give him an army, a harem, a governorship. He is offering to change Diogenes' reality instantly. But it is also a trap. It is a status game. If Diogenes asks for something, even a loaf of bread, he accepts the iframe. He admits that Alexander has the power and he has the need. He becomes the subject. He validates Alexander's view of the world. Diogenes does not move. He does not scramble to his knees. He does not thank the king. He simply shifts his weight in the dirt. He looks at the golden armor, then he looks at the sky, then he looks back at Alexander's face. He notices one specific detail. Alexander is standing in front of the sun. The king's body is blocking the warm rays that Diogenes was enjoying a moment ago. The old man lifts a dirty finger and points it at the conqueror of the world. "Stand a little out of my sun." The silence that follows is not the silence of fear. It is the silence of shock. The crowd is paralyzed. Did he just tell the king to move? Did he just treat Alexander the Great like a piece of furniture that was in the way? Let's analyze the psychology of this response. It is the ultimate power move. It is a complete rejection of Alexander's value system. Alexander offered him the world, and Diogenes said, "The only thing of value right now is the sunlight, and you are the only thing ruining it. You are not a god, you are an opacity. You are a cloud." By refusing to ask for anything, Diogenes proved that he was richer than Alexander. Alexander had to conquer the world to find satisfaction. Diogenes just needed a patch of sunlight. Alexander was a slave to his ambition. Diogenes was free. In that moment, the frame shattered. Alexander was no longer the benevolent god-king dispensing gifts. He was just a nuisance, blocking the light. The soldiers around Alexander began to titter. They reached for their swords, ready to cut this insolent beggar in half. They waited for the explosion of rage. They waited for Alexander to scream, to kick the jar, to order the execution. But Alexander did not scream. He did not move. He stood there, staring at the dirty, naked man who had just defeated him without lifting a finger. The color drained from the king's face. He realized the truth. He realized that he could conquer Persia. He could burn Thebes. He could march to India. But he would never be as free as this man living in a cracked pot. Alexander slowly stepped aside. The sunlight hit Diogenes' face again. The old man closed his eyes, let out a sigh of contentment, and went back to ignoring the most powerful man alive. Alexander turned to his laughing soldiers. He raised a hand, silencing them instantly. He looked back at the jar one last time, with a look of pure, unadulterated envy. "Silence," he commanded. "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." It is a quote that has echoed for 2,000 years. If I were not the master of everything, I would want to be the master of nothing. This encounter brings us to the end of our journey through the history of silence. We have looked at the spectrum of human power. We started with the Spartans, who used brevity to mask their weakness and project strength. We saw Genghis Khan, who bypassed language to create a machine of death. We watched Stalin use the void to break the minds of his generals. We stood with August Landmesser, who used stillness to preserve his soul in a sea of madness. And finally, we sit with Diogenes. What connects these stories? What is the thread that ties the Spartan warrior to the Cynic philosopher? It is the realization that noise is a symptom of need. We live in a world that is louder than ever. We are bombarded by notifications, by 24-hour news cycles, by politicians screaming for our attention, by influencers begging for our likes. We are conditioned to believe that the person talking the most is the person in charge. We think that to be heard, we must shout, but history tells us a different story. History tells us that the person who speaks first is often the one who loses. It tells us that the person who needs to explain themselves is the person who is afraid. True power is not about controlling others. It is about controlling yourself. It is about the ability to sit in a room and not say a word. It is about the ability to look at a threat and offer a laconic reply. It is about the ability to look at a bribe and say, "You are blocking my son." The most dangerous man in the room is not the one shouting orders. It is the one who is watching, listening, and waiting. The one who understands that words are a finite resource. So, the next time you feel the pressure to speak, the pressure to justify yourself, the pressure to fill the silence, remember the Spartan. Remember the whistling arrow. Remember the man in the jar. Stop, breathe, and let the silence do the work for you. Because, in the end, true power isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who needs to say the least.